Thank you very much for this kind welcome. Coming to Bristol, I looked in my pictures or my slides from Bristol. I was there last year, and then I thought, gee, that reckless engineer pop, I'll use that as a theme for my talk. And then I thought he was just a silly engineer, and I could reasonably talk about him for the whole afternoon. Then I was told he was Brunel, really one engineer who took chances, and then I realized there are bad engineers and there are the good engineers and the other engineers. And I always thought it referred to the other group of engineers, so I decided even not to talk about him this time. The overriding theme of my presentation is the long journey from Jane Jacobs to now when Liverpool cities are well accepted and is used as a term all over the world. It is a long journey of almost 50 years in this case with Trafalgar Square, with Times Square, and I'll try to put some historic perspective into all this. And I will start with the year 1960. That was, of course, a period of great dramatic changes. That was the time when the new paradigm of modernism really started to be used widely across the world, and we saw all these residential high-rise popping up all over the place. That was the time of the car invasion, where the cars in great numbers were invading cities all over Europe. They had already invaded quite a bit in America, but we deemed all this calamity to starting at 1960, when the economy after the Second World War started to recover and everything was going boom in the 60s. In New York, these new ideas of modernism and motorism were quickly picked up by Robert Moses, who in my opinion is one of the reckless engineers. But Robert Moses, he had the Lomax idea of making a lower Manhattan, trans-Manhattan freeway. Greenwich Village should come down. It was redundant. Chinatown, Soho, they are all redundant. They should come down. And a string of beautiful modernistic high-rise residential buildings should walk across Manhattan. And that was the great plan of this reckless engineer. Then Jane Jacobs was sitting over in Hudson Street in Greenwich Village and was going to be redundant. She was a journalist working for, I think, architectural, one of the famous architectural magazines of America, and she fought Robert Moses vigorously. She went to jail and whatever, and then she won that battle, and she stopped the Lomax across Manhattan, and she wrote this famous book, The Death and Lives of Great American Cities, saying that if the modernists and the motorists are to plan the cities of the future, it will be the end of the great American cities, and actually the end of any city, and it will be the death of the cities. 1960, 1961. About almost the same time in Europe, in Copenhagen, my hometown, the first street closure was made. The first major main street of any European city, not quite the first, but one of the very early pioneers. They cleared out the traffic of the main street, and they were also reacting to the same things as Jane Jacobs was reacting. That was that the car invasion, and they very early took this step to make it people-friendly in the city. What else happened in these years? I graduated as an architect. That was exactly 1960. I was trained as a very good, obedient modernist, and we spent all the time leaning over models and moving objects around until it was a nice city. It looks great now. It's a good plan. So I rushed out of School of Architecture ready to do this when I married a psychologist. And that was the beginning of many discussions in our home where these young psychologists kept saying to us, brave new architects who was going to make this wonderful modern world, why don't you learn anything about people in schools of architecture? Why aren't you even interested in people? Why haven't you realized that whenever you build anything, you influence the life of people mightily, so you're manipulating day and night and you don't know a thing about it? That was what these kind people said to us young architects. Most of them just went on to make these crummy towers and whatever. I couldn't get away, so I was forced to go back to School of Architecture for another 40 years to find out what I was not taught in the first round. I did maybe I can tell you a little story from, I need this one. It was an English conference. Ken Warpole, a British architecture critic, took out a jar of something, said, I feel sorry for you architects because your mean of communication is the one that is a still photo and the two-dimensional drawing. By this means of communication, you can only communicate the form to each other, which you do so very much. And in that way, you start to think that architecture is this. This is not architecture. This is sculpture. Architecture is the interaction between this and life. And while form is much easier to study and communicate, life is much more complicated, intriguing, and the interaction is quite something to study. I spent the next 40 years lying on my knees trying to find out about this and the interaction. And if the interaction works, and only then it is good architecture. My life in a short version is that I have had 55 years of research producing a number of books. And then in the last 15 years, I've also had a company, and that came about in the way that many mayors started to come over and say, you can criticize, and we academics, we can criticize for free all over the world. We can say how stupid you are, how your engineers can't find out of anything. We really think it's an awful work you're doing. Then they started to talk my sleeves and say, couldn't you please come and tell us what to do instead of criticizing all the time? Then I was forced to make a company, a consultant company, Gale Architects, where we are advising on how to make livable, sustainable, and healthy cities. We've been out there for 15 years. We are now about 50 people, and we have 2 offices in the States and the main office in Copenhagen, Denmark. My partner, Helle Søholt, joined me at that time, one of my former students. And in the 15 years we've been out there, we have worked in big projects for cities from all parts of the world, from capital of Greenland to Christchurch after the earthquake, San Francisco, Seattle, Cape Town, Shanghai, Almaty in Kazakhstan is the latest one. Reykjavik is a little pale here because they never paid us. But this shows to me what an enormous interest there is worldwide for better cities, for people, for more livable cities. So the moment we raised this flag, the phone started to ring, and it's been ringing ever since. It went from landline to mobile phone, but it's still ringing. But to me, it's fabulous that there's such a big, serious interest for good cities, for people. Through all these years of my research, we've had a very rich foundation for the built environment in Denmark. I would even say stinking rich. And they very early took an interest in this the human dimension in city planning and architecture. And they said, would you need some money for your research? And certainly I could need some money. And then we had money. We had more money than any other unit in the university, so a lot of time. And then I left university, and then they came bloody well once again and say, Jan, we would like you to sit down and write down everything you know while you can still remember it. And then I said, I haven't time. I have all these cities you're up there. And they say, isn't that a number, a question of how many assistants you will need to do this work? And then they did a little game, and at a certain time I had time, and we did the book. And the book is here, and it is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. It contains what I've learned in the 45 years I have been studying and working in cities. And much again to my great surprise and joy, this has been now in 5 years distributed to actually 25 countries, because I have not Mongolia and Georgia on this list, neither Bulgaria or Albania, but it is really spread out, and again showing that there is an enormous wish to know something about how to make cities for people. Notable about this list, which you cannot see in detail, is that it's now come out in German, took 40 years. It's now come out in French, took also 40 years. And did it come out in Paris, in France? No, in Montreal. And they have exported it to France. And the Spanish version came out in Argentina, and the Brazilian version came out in Brazil, in Portuguese. But it's available. What does this book deal with? It deals very much with these 50 years. Actually, it's a fantastic chance for any person to have the possibility to look down to 50 years of work and see what actually happened, and be able to write it down. And so this very much is about the two old paradigms and the new one. I told you about the old paradigms. The modernism, actually it's much older than 1960, but in 1960 it took off. It was conceived in the 20s and the 30s, and it was not used very much during the Second World War or in the years following, where until the various cities got their act together to build. And at the same time, we had this economic situation, so that the cities were growing very, very rapidly in the late 50s, early 60s. And then the modernistic ideas was ready. And what happened was that instead of in all the old cities, we built one house at a time along streets and squares. And we had the public spaces being an important part. Now suddenly the planners went up in aeroplanes to overlook the whole thing, and they stood there putting down the objects until they say, like here, bingo. And the site planners, they also went up. They went up in helicopters to overview these various blocks and whatever. And what happened at that time was that the people scale, where people were, was not addressed by any. There was no profession at all who looked after this, and it was not realized that this was completely overlooked and forgotten. You would think that the landscape architects were very busy down here, but if you look at the curriculum of the landscape architecture schools, there are not much knowledge about people in most of those in these 50 years. And so in real life, nobody was looking after where people were while everybody was flying around and doing these funny things. I call it the Brasilia syndrome because Brasilia was typically made so it looks fantastic from the air and it's impossible at eye level. Here you can see them working hard, the usual suspects. And down there is a new town in Holland. And you can almost hear them saying, we have no oval buildings. Oh, okay, we can fit in 2 oval buildings here, And couldn't we turn those other buildings, the cubes, 45 degrees? Wouldn't that be absolutely smashing? And then they smashed them 45 degrees. And now you have this wonderful city for the Dutch people to walk around in and to bicycle around in with their children on the bike and whatever. I have summed up my impression of the modernistic that at any time a bunch of professional planners had been paid to make something which was not attractive for people and not inviting for people. It could never have been done better than following strictly the modernistic principles. That was the reckless engineer is popping up there again. The technocrat. The other paradigm shift in around 60 was this car invasion, and it filled all the existing cities with far too much traffic. It's worse all over the world, but maybe it's even worse in Romania. But now they have my book, so I think they will sort it out rather quickly. But also this automobile and the cheap gasoline, they led to a fantastic expansion of the cities in the suburbs with all this infrastructure for cars. And again, there was no consideration for people, for walking, for bicycling, for meeting. It was just cheap gasoline. The reckless engineer was riding again, that bad guy. But now, after 50 years, we distinctly have a change. I've seen it very, very distinctly being expressed. I think that all these cities where we have worked, and many other ones, and the distribution of this book about livable cities is a sign that there's definitely a new tune to the melody at this point. I think that maybe 15 years ago or something it started to turn. Certainly has turned now. And now every mayor I know in the world would love and ask for a lively, livable city, and we must make a sustainable city, and we are more and more there's more and more need for us to make a city inviting for healthy lifestyles. Why is it that we need lively and livable cities? Yeah, Suzanne has very, very excellently described how this livability and liveliness has gone through the history of man, human beings, settlement, urban settlements, throughout the history of man, that the greatest interest of people are other people, that the meeting of people has so many qualities that these places where people meet have always had this special character and importance for the quality of life and for the communities. We have a number of new drivers in this area. We have smaller and smaller households. We have more and more untraditional households. We have more and more elderly people living longer and longer in fine shape. We have more and more leisure time. We have generally in our part of the world a better economy. All this has to be used for something, and you have to spend the time, and you cannot spend it all the time looking at your iPhone or having indirect communication. You get inspired by this indirect communication to want the real thing, and the cities can offer the real thing. It is my experience that whenever we make places for people which are good enough, really good enough, then people will happily come and use them. The next driver for this new way of city planning is certainly that we know that we have to make much more sustainable cities. It has been found that most of the problems for the climate comes from the cities. And ever since the Brundtland report in 1987, we have increasingly been addressing this, some cities better than other ones. But maybe I should say that if you have a city where you walk more or bicycle more, it's very good for the climate. But more important is that we will have to come up with transportation modes, with ways of mobility which is not makes people dependent on 4 rubber wheels, one in either corner, but that we will have to improve the quality of the public transportation and make this much more attractive and inviting. And good public transportation and a good public realm, they're brothers and sisters, so you can walk down there, you can bicycle down there, you can do it in comfort and safety 24 hours a day. The third driver we have now is and that is part of the theme of this conference, that is that we increasingly have realized that for 50 years we made city planning which invites people to do absolutely nothing. And that has caused great problems. I read somewhere that more people now are dying of a lack of exercise rather than smoking. So lack of exercise or inactivity is a major killer nowadays. And there was a time when all of us thought that everybody would be so sensible as to take the escalator to the fitness center 2 times a week throughout the year. We know now that it's only a little fraction who do anything like that. Most of us have had intentions of doing it at times, but then there were so many other things which should be looked after. It is realized, of course, that we can make city planning which invites people to use their own energy. And having talked to some of the key doctors in this area, they tell me it's not obesity which is a problem, it's inactivity. You can be very fat and very active and have a good life, and you can be very slim and sit on your behind all day and you will have a bad time. They also tell me that 1 hour of moderate exercise a day, half an hour of walking in the morning and half an hour bicycling in the afternoon or something, that will give you 7 extra years of life. And if you count a little bit, 1 hour a day, that would be 2 years of life, and you gain then 5. But the main point is that you will have a much better quality of life in your own days, and it will be much, much cheaper for society if people are more active during their life. And it's not something about making good recreational things for the Sunday. It's all important that it's for all weekdays. So Monday biking is much better than Sunday biking only. And we even have now from World Health Organization a global action plan saying, please, all cities, make sure that your people can walk and bike as much as possible to school and to work and whatever. That was in 2003 that World Health Organization issued that global strategy. We have a new situation, we have new drivers. And my point is that if we are sweet to people in city planning, if we make good conditions for people to walk, for public life, for people to meet, and for people to bicycle, we actually have a more lively, more livable, more sustainable, and more healthy city. So what is holding us back? It's furthermore the cheapest you can do in city planning, that is be good to people. Much cheaper than being good to automobiles, I can tell you. So, do we have some cities who have such a policy that in this city we'll do everything to invite people to walk and bicycle as much as possible all days? Yeah, we do have some. I will invite you to my hometown of Copenhagen. Copenhagen was very lucky. It survived the wars and it survived the city planners of the 60s and the traffic planners of the 70s. It was like a number of other European cities, it was more or less conserved, and it was not difficult when the cars were invading to start to say, hey, we must stop this. There's no room for all this. So already in 1962, they were brave enough, and there was great discussion, all this about that we would never come out of our houses in Scandinavia because of the climate and the Nordic mentality. We were not Italians. It will never work, so they did it anyway, and next year we started to be Italians, and we've become more Italianized ever for 53 years ever since. Copenhagen became the first city in the world where the life of the city was studied systematically from very early on. And that was done not by the city, but by university. It was done as a research project. We were interested in people in cities, and where to study this, we could go down in our own downtown in the newly established pedestrian streets and see how people used it in snow, in rain, in storm, in sunshine, in summer, winter, Halloween and Christmas, whatever. And that was done, and that was started to be published. And so there was this interesting cooperation between town and gown, where the university studied what was going on, and the city got more and more excited about seeing that whenever they did something good for people, there were more people using the city. And in the end, they got really excited, and we almost thought they were improving the city too fast. But we've seen over 50 years numerous improvements to the city fabric, inspired by making it better for people. When I retired as a professor, I got this nice letter from the mayor saying, if you guys in university had not collected all this documentation about how people use the city, we in the city council would never have dared to make Copenhagen one of the most livable cities in the world. So we found that having evidence is very important for having the political strength to convince the businessmen and whoever, the motormen and whoever, that this is actually a good policy. We also, by having all these figures, were able to see that there's been, over time, a distinct change in the use of city. 100 years ago, the city of Copenhagen was used like any developing city today. Everybody was out on the street all day. They were carrying stuff. They were walking to everything, couldn't do anything else. They were selling trinkets. There was a thriving life in the city, but it was all because they had to be there. Then came the cars, and people were squeezed out to the sidewalks. Then came the first, the worry about the influence of the cars. And then the city streets were pedestrianized, and that was originally done to make the city center into a shopping center. But when we go back to the same spaces today, we can see people in their thousands not shopping, but having a great time. So we've seen this shift from a very purposeful shopping thing to being a park or park-like thing where you meet other people, where you see what's going on, where you do recreation. We now have just as many people coming in on Sundays as on weekdays. And when we ask people, not only in Copenhagen, but also in Australian and German cities, 30 years ago or 25 years ago, why are you in town? I'm in town to shop. And we ask them today, they say, why are you in town? I'm in town to see what's going on and to have a good time and to have some good meal. And don't you shop? Yeah, if there's something interesting, I shop, yeah. But so the city has become, or meeting other people, have become a destination in its own right. Just to give you an idea, this was 62 when the first street was closed. And it was important to note that it's not just closing 2 blocks, but it's closing 1 kilometer, going from one end of the city to the other. So it really started to be a route. Now the same area looked like this. These are all the spaces where, in the meantime, improvements have been made to make them better for people. I have, when looking at all these things which have happened in these 50 years, we can see distinctly 3 or 4 phases. The first phase was the pedestrianization of streets, which was to promote walking and promenading and get better conditions for maybe the businesses and the shopping, and then we had the pedestrian streets. The next 20 years, we started to see a great number of squares being freed of parking and turned into cafe or recreational spaces, and the key words were that to invite people to stay and to do recreation. And again, this coincides with people having traveled and seen nice things, people having been to nice southern cities and knew that drinking cappuccino was the utmost in recreation, and they wanted to do it at their hometown. And also we began to see all over the world the streams of tourists, and they are very great users, not of just walking. The best thing about being a tourist is to stop walking and sit down and enjoy. So there was this 20 years where it was really recreation and staying which was prominent. But now the last period, or the third period, increasingly we are making squares and streets and facilities for playing, sports, activities and enjoyment. And also the architecture gets more and more inspiring and interesting. So that's all fine. But there's very interestingly, there's this pattern that you have to, don't stop when you made a little pedestrian street, go on and adapt your offer to the population, to the various changes there are. Then you may ask, what do you do when you've done everything you can think of? You start with version 2.0, next generation. In Copenhagen, they have now made this official city council decision. We will be the best city in the world for people. They have stated a number of goals, and one of them is we shall walk more and we shall spend more time in parks and whatever. But the main thing here is we shall have people to come out of their privatized homes. We shall try to invite people to spend more time in public spaces with other people, where they can see who else is in society, where they can be inspired, where the children can play. We've heard Suzanne talk about this many times. Here's an official policy about this, and it's very much something about having a better inclusion, social inclusion in society, and it's very good for democracy. All this is in this policy, which I leave here, not for the mayor of Bristol, because he is one who's really understood this, but other mayors can pick it up. What have they done then? Now they say it's not only the city center which should be nice, it's the whole city where people should have a good time. They made a complete citywide plan for all the types of public spaces which they have. They've classified them. They made a plan of what to do in which places, and they have toolboxes for each of the situation. One of the things in this fourth phase is that instead of having all the old streets with 4 lanes, we now have almost no 4-lane streets anymore. We have 2-lane streets, 1 lane in either direction. There are street trees, there are bicycle lanes, there are widened sidewalks, there are medians so that people can cross more easily. And these new streets, they are much more safe, they are much more beautiful, and they can almost take the same amount of traffic as the old one could, because the traffic engineers today, they are much smarter than they were in the 80s or 70s. What else are they doing? Yeah, they're doing things like this, that whenever a small street goes into a major street, the little street is narrowed, and the sidewalk and the bicycle lane is taken across the little street. Then there's room for a tree or 2, and that's fine, and that shows that any person walking or bicycling is just as worthy a person in the city as any guy in a side street who has a Mercedes-Benz. And I thought that was great. But then I talked to my daughter, and my daughter said, "Oh, Father, it's so wonderful what they've made in our neighborhood, because now Laura, my granddaughter, 7 years, now she can walk to school all the way and stay on the sidewalk. She hasn't any streets to cross anymore. And when you are 7, that's everything. Then she can walk to and from school, and that's a great achievement, and that's part of this policy. I only learned that from my daughter. Some of the new things is that they are going around in the city and widening the sidewalks on the sunny side of the street so that you can have chairs and cafes and whatever. They are making new squares. In this case, it's a combined square for exercise, for square, and for a schoolyard for the nearby school. It used to look like this. Now it looked like this, whatever. And the story here is never stop. There's so much you can do to make it a wonderful city for people, the best city in the world for people. I challenge you to do better even. The other important thing about Copenhagen city planning is the bicycling policy, which has been around for a long time, and they now have a complete citywide network. And there is an efficient alternative transportation system. You can transport anything, and every third family with children have a cargo bike to bring them to kindergarten and whatever. The cycle system has been made more and more safe. The crucial points are the street crossings, and a lot have been done to make those safe. And we found that the more people bike, the more safer it is. And it's been followed up so that it's a real system, so that you can take your bicycles in the taxis, you can take it in the train and in the metro. And over time, a bicycle culture has really developed in our community, in our city, in our country. Businessmen, pregnant mothers, children, everybody, crown prince, bicycles. Tell you about when my wife and I had our 45th anniversary. We were sitting out there 8 kilometers from the city center, and we thought we deserved a good dinner for the occasion. So we took our bikes, and we were 136 years together. So some of us was a little bit more than 70, and some of us was a little bit less. But in the 70 range, we were able to bike on the bike lanes all the way, side by side, small talking, going through crossings which were safe to cross, going through the inner city and seeing all the nice spaces which have been made, crossing the harbor, going back, having dinner over there, and going on bicycles. You can always have one extra glass of red wine. So it was a little bit shaky when we were going towards home. And when we came home, we realized we've done 19.8 kilometers on bikes in our age of around 70. And then we sat down and talked about that such a thing would never have been able when we were married. All these improvements have been made gradually in the 45 years we had been married. I think this may actually work. Just to give you an idea, I put this little map down on the map of New York. You start in Central Park, you go down to Battery Park, you take a little sweep over to Newark, and then you go to the meatpacking district and have dinner, and then you make your way leisurely back to Central Park. 19.8 kilometers. Also, Copenhagen now have this policy: we will be the best city in the world for bicycling. And it's so important that you have these sort of strategies where you're heading with all your livability, whatever. And now they made this perfect city for bicycling. What then to do? Oh, you have to have a version 2, version 2.0, because we have problems now. We have serious congestion on the bicycle lanes. It's really bad. In some streets, we have 40,000 bicycles a day. What do you do with this? The only thing you should not do is to do what Norman Foster suggests for London, that he make a freeway system for bicycles 30 meters in the west wind up there, and mothers will have, with children on the bike, will have to go all the way up there, and then they can go without any girls to look at, without any shops to look at, without any excitement at all, except the western wind to enjoy. Have a good trip. That's not the way to do it. What can we do? You have to widen the bicycle lanes, which we are doing in great number now. And where do we take the asphalt? We take it from the cars. And it's very good policy because you can have 5 times more bicycles, people on a bicycle lane than you can have people on a car lane. So if you have enough bicycles or you can ride enough, it's good economy. Here you can see how the old parking spaces are still just about visible under the widened bike lane. Then they've done all kinds of refinements. We have green waves for bicycles. If you go 20 kilometers an hour, you will never stop in rush hour. We have bike lanes with fast lanes and slow lanes. And because we have all these congestion on bicycle lanes, they made an alternative system for the longer distances, greenways, where you bicycle through parks and whatever. They've been forced, or we have been forced, to widen all the capacity in the trains, and it's really smart that you can, for free, take your bike on the suburban trains. When I and my wife go out to my son's place, we pedal 2 kilometers down to the station. We take the bikes along for 25 kilometers, and we pedal 2 kilometers again, and we are there in style, and we get a little bit of exercise. They've done all this about making shortcuts. They put in bicycle lanes or pedestrian lanes all over the place at this point. What has happened? We are up now to 37% of everybody who arrive by bicycle to work and to study. No, that's not so, because this is 5 years ago. Today it's 45%. And they have a goal of reaching 50% before 2020, I think it is. Copenhagen has consistently been one of the most livable cities. Monaco 2 times in a row. Now it's down to number 10 because they have incalculated the price of cappuccino also. That's very bastardly of them. But it's really wonderful to live in a city which has become a little bit better every day. And that's what my wife and I concluded after this trip, that it's wonderful to live in a city where every morning when you wake up, you know it is a little bit better than it was yesterday. Copenhagen has been like that. And much to my joy, I can see this now is spreading, or it's long ago spreading. It's part of the Danish DNA. It's part of the way, the mindset we think. This is not my grandmother. This is the cultural minister of Denmark reading her favorite book. And she told me specifically that she was going to be photographed among all the other European ministers of culture with their favorite book and say, I took your book in English version so they can see what I'm interested in. And we now have the Danish architectural policy has just been changed. So now it's not about shaping architecture for export or something. It's now about putting people first in the architecture policy. That's wonderful to be in a place like this. I could talk a lot about other cities. I could talk about Melbourne, which many of you know. It's a miracle. It's like Paris, and the quality is fantastic, and the weather is better. And we found that there are more and more people using Melbourne. We found that all the economic factors in Melbourne are up as part of this revitalization of the inner city of Melbourne. They are full speed doing bicycle system based on the Copenhagen principle of having the park cars to protect the bikes instead of having the bicyclists to protect the park cars. If you don't know what to do, move to Melbourne. I could talk about Sydney, but I won't. Sydney is great for many things, but certainly it's not got a good quality in the city center. But they are full speed changing this now. They are taking all the bloody cars and buses out of Main Street, putting in light rail and pedestrians and bicycles. They are full speed making bicycle systems. And what they are very good at in Sydney is making posters about what they intend to do. They've not been so fast in doing things, but they have a very firm commitment to doing it. And if you read these posters more closely, they say, we are doing all this, we are going to walk and bicycle, we are doing it for your own health, and we are doing it for the climate, and you voted for it, so here it is. So they tell people clearly what it's all about. I think it's wonderful. And here is one of the list of livable cities, and you can see that many of these cities I mentioned, Sydney, Copenhagen, Melbourne, this of course is a somewhat old list, 2 years old, without cappuccino prices, but it shows a clear pattern that those who have a people-oriented policy, they score very high. I could tell you, if I had time, I have not, about New York, where the mayor, Michael Bloomberg, promised that he will make the greenest, the most sustainable metropole in the world in 2007. Right after this, his planning mayor, the commissioner for transport, Shahid Sadiq Khan, commissioner for planning, Amanda Burton, they popped up in Copenhagen, and when they left, they whispered, "We want a city like this one. And when can you come?" And we said Monday. And they spoke very lowly, because you cannot go to New York and say you've got your inspiration from puny little European cities. They've got inspiration many places, but we were commissioned to help them, and we have had a very, very valuable cooperation with New York. And being in America, they are very fast. They started right away to make bicycle systems. They have this ambitious plan of 5,000 kilometers. They are doing it in all their boroughs. And then they thought that also it would be time that the Americans and the tourists should have a chance to sit down and enjoy New York when they were there anyway, instead of just shuffling on the sidewalks. And then it was found that maybe we could do without Broadway. And then it was found that Broadway could be closed at the important points. And this is Broadway 2009 in the morning, and this is Broadway 2009 later in the day. They closed this. It was an experiment. The mayor was under great fusillade from taxis, saying you can never do this in America. And he said it's only an experiment. Half a year later, he came out and say, "An experiment? No way. It's one of the biggest success we've had in recent North American city planning. It will stay." They have elaborated on the theme here, brought in the bisons and the prairie. It's a good place for New Yorkers. And here we have Frank Sinatra singing about Broadway. When you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. And that was heard in Moscow. And then I was approached by the mayor or the vice mayor of Moscow, saying, "Can you come and do a New York in Moscow? It's very urgent." And we said we can come on Monday. And Moscow was really overrun by cars and by parking. And some joker has said that the freedom from communism means that you have the right to park everywhere. And this is a nice little street in Moscow at that time, 2011. This is Main Street, Moscow, 1 meter left for pedestrians, because they had not enough of this free parking, so they could use the sidewalk of Main Street for parking. Great. Moscow was very eager. The first thing they, how many books do we have? We published them all. And in 3 months, they were all published by City of Moscow. The guy over there in the corner, who's a little bit worried, that's the Danish ambassador. We were hired by New York to come and do a study of New York. And during this study, I was called up to the mayor, Mr. Sobyanin, and he said, "What would be in your report, Jan?" I said, yes, you know, parking on the sidewalk of Main Street, Moscow is not the greatest idea I've ever heard about. I would mention that in my report. 2 months later, I was back. There was no parking on Main Street, Moscow sidewalks. They have very efficient democracy. And then you will think that they will forget about it. But the mayor has some little tricks here. And if you forget your car where it should not be, it is taken directly to Siberia. And you think this is a little bit crude and rude. Then look at this is from Vilnius in Lithuania, where the mayor goes around and make it known that he doesn't want Mercedes on his bike lanes. Jane Jacobs is sitting up in the corner jiggling. And here we have the miracle of Moscow 2 years later, 1.5 years later, no cars on the sidewalk. Green Street has started to become Green Street. They've got all the advertisements in the air. They've got them down, so now you can see Kremlin in the distance. And furthermore, they don't need overcoats anymore, so it's a much better street now. The theme here is from Jane Jacobs to livable cities. And when the mayor of Moscow goes around to conferences and talk about the need for livable cities, then I think that Jane Jacobs' words have finally been listened to. Thank you.